Welcome to Older Militaris Radio TV, and we're lifelong Catholics, and what we do is all for free, and for our love of Jesus Christ, and for our Holy Mother, the Church, and we'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. Today we get into the heart of the Pacific Theater campaign with Douglas MacArthur, and we'll try to do our best to hit the important areas without going too long with information for you. With Brother Alexis Bonello.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Order Militaris Radio TV, your unique Catholic apostolate, for bringing information on the internet that no other Catholic apostolate does. Many people get the idea that when we Catholics on the internet, all we do is talk about religion, but that's just not true. And a lot of Catholics who talk about other topics won't identify themselves as Catholics. We're not afraid of that. So before we begin, I want to thank the Douglas A. MacArthur National Library in Norfolk, Virginia, for allowing us to read from the memoirs of this great American general. And AJ, if you have the book, maybe you can show it up. And AJ has a link in every show page how you can get a copy from the Navy bookstore. So let's make this book sell out. This is a great book. Every homeschooling family, I think, should have a copy. This is an excellent assigned reading for boys in their final year of high school. Learn about American history and world history from the point of view of a great man who had a great strategic mind. And so in our previous episodes, we covered everything from his birth and his participation in the First World War. He was chief of staff of the Department of War. It's called the Department of Defense today. And in our last program, we talked about his participation in World War II, the Pacific Theater, and we just read the absolutely amazing heroic escape he made from the Philippines in the spring of 1942. And he didn't want to go, but he was commanded by President Roosevelt. 10 days later, after he's arrived in Australia, he makes a famous statement that really, if anyone remembers any quote of MacArthur, this is the quote the whole world remembers him for. What's that all about, AJ?
So when he pulls into the station at Melbourne, Australia, he thinks there's an army waiting for him to return. And so he goes out to the microphone and says, "I have made it through the Japanese blockade. I have made it from the Philippines, and I shall return."
And this is the great promise that really, when this was transmitted to the Philippine people and to the garrison of Corregidor, which had not yet fallen, everyone's morale was really raised. And many of the men who walked the death march of Bataan after they were captured by that Japanese army when Corregidor fell, though few survived, it was these words that kept them alive. So this shows you leadership, great leadership. A great leader encourages the people who look to him for salvation or hope. And he doesn't get involved in petty statements, but he makes noble promises. And though MacArthur was not a Catholic, this is really drawing from Christian spirituality, true charity for people who are looking up to you and how to be a leader. So remember this, Catholic youth, as you study for your future lives. So Australia at this time didn't have many people, doesn't have many people today. I think when I visited it back in the early 90s, it only had like 16 million. When MacArthur was there, I think they only had like 3.5 million. So that's about as many people as maybe the San Francisco area. So I don't know what MacArthur was expecting, but what did he find?
The immediate and imperative problem which confronted me was the defense of Australia itself. Its actual military situation had become almost desperate. Its forces were weak to an extreme, and Japanese invasion was momentarily expected. The bulk of its ground troops were in the Middle East, while the United States had only one division present, and that but partially trained. Its air force was equipped with almost obsolete planes and was lacking not only in engines and spare parts, but in personnel. Its navy had no carriers or battleships. The outlook was bleak.
Yeah. About the only thing what two things saved, three things saved Australia. One, Japan was trying to conquer too much territory too fast and didn't think of strategic targets. If the
Mhm.
Japanese had a more strategically minded high command, they would have taken Australia first, because that would have denied a base to the Allies in the Pacific. The Allies really couldn't have done anything to take back territory from Japan without Australia. They would have had to go all the way to India, and that would march through Burma. I mean, that would be like impossible. The United States couldn't possibly mass huge amounts of supplies and depots and planes and ships without Australia. But the Japanese didn't think of that. The second thing was they were delayed in coming, and we talked about that in the last program, by MacArthur's brilliant strategy of abandoning Manila and moving all his forces to the Bataan Peninsula to hold Corregidor and deny the Japanese the use of Manila Bay as entrepot for all their military activities in Southeast Asia. And of course, the third was MacArthur's leadership. The Japanese to attack Australia, but knowing that MacArthur was in command was intimidating, to say the least. So I know in Australia to this day, MacArthur is praised. They have statues of him, and as the savior of their country, they know how much they're indebted to the man. What did he try to do? What did he do? Did Japanese actually attack Australia?
So he's saying, having been witness to the Japanese conquest of Hong Kong, Thailand, Malaya, Rabat, and Northern Solomons, the Australians, he means, the Australian chiefs of staff understandably had been thinking and planning only defensively. They had chased a line generally along the Darling River from Brisbane midway up the eastern shoreline to Adelaide on the south coast. This would be defended to the last breath. Such a plan, however, involved the sacrifice of three-quarters or more of the continent, the great northern and western reaches of the land. Behind this so-called Brisbane line were 4 or 5 most important cities, and a large proportion of the population, the heart of Australia. As the areas to the north fell to the enemy, detailed plans were made to withdraw from New Guinea and lay desolate the land above the Brisbane line. Industrial plants, utilities in Northern Territory will be dynamited, and military facilities will be leveled, port installations rendered useless and irreparable. The concept was purely one of passive defense, and I felt it would result only in eventual defeat. Even if so restrictive a scheme were tactically successful, its result would be a trap to us indefinitely on an island continent, ringed by conquered territories and hostile ocean, bereft of all hope of ever assuming the offensive. I decided to abandon the plan completely, to move the 1,000 miles forward into eastern Papua, and to stop the Japanese on the rough mountains of the Owen Stanley range of New Guinea, and to make the fight for Australia beyond its own borders. If successful, this would save Australia from invasion and give me an opportunity to pass from defense to offense, to seize the initiative and move forward in attack.
This is absolutely brilliant strategy, and it was decisive. And this is a lesson for everyone. Don't let the enemy fight you in the house. If you can fight on better territory in the street, go ahead and do it. That's what to do. Don't let them ever come close to the families. And so this is a man who thought of others. See, the Australian High Command would have just collapsed under if it wasn't for MacArthur. This is a brilliant plan. You know anything about Papua New Guinea? It's this huge island just north of Australia. It's kind of strange shaped, and it has the most impenetrable tropical forests and mountains. And it has like 250 different languages, all different tribes that speak different languages. And the people who live there are sometimes called Aborigines, but but they're not the same native peoples of Australia. Nevertheless, they had extensive contact with missionaries, both of the Catholic Church and of the English Church and of the Germans. And so they're very friendly people. They're very loyal people. They didn't like the Japanese at all, and the Japanese didn't make themselves like. They started rounding up civilians and killing them. And so this was excellent territory to choose a fight on, because you had friendly inhabitants on the land. And there's a couple movies made about this that are really interesting. Can't name them off the top, but if you chance upon them, you get some idea what kind of brutal fighting went on in this campaign.
Okay, so he moved his headquarters from Fort Brisbane, then to Port Moresby. If I could secure Moresby, I would force the enemy to fight on ground of my selection, across the barrier of the Owen Stanley Ridge. This range of mountains, over 13,000 feet high, covered with dense jungle, formed a natural barrier which ran the entire length of eastern New Guinea. Winding and foot trails were the only means of crossing it. Port Moresby, to its rear, was well sheltered by its towering cliffs. The only other feasible approach by which the enemy could attack was through Milne Bay, at the southeastern tip of New Guinea. Such an attack might be blocked if adequate air bases at Port Moresby could be constructed in time. My problem was to move my center of gravity forward 1,500 miles and secure this line before the enemy could seize it. The operation involved was insuperable obstacles of the time and space. It necessitated the construction of airfields for fighter planes and bases for heavy bombers, first within range of Papa, then on Papa itself. It involved provisions for supply and reinforcement of advanced areas for mere bases in Australia, which were in large part merely ports for the reshipping of material from the distant west coast of the United States. It necessitated the exploration and mapping of unfamiliar areas, the charting of unknown waters, and demanded friendly cooperation from New Guinea natives. It required the training of our forces for combat against an experienced and numerical superior enemy, and it was risked carrying out these moves by sea into areas dominated by the naval power of the Japanese.
So Port Moresby is on the southeast coast of, or the east coast of New Guinea, and it is a strategic point. And this sounds like a really tough task, but I don't know if anyone in the audience knows Australian people. I had a confrere in minor seminary who was an Australian, and I spent 6 weeks in Australia in my youth. The Australians are absolutely eager folk. They're optimistic. They rush to a challenge. If they have a good leader, they rally behind him. So where in some countries, if you tried to get them to do something so absolutely beyond anyone's expectations, the people would have failed. Not in Australia. The Australians are great people, and they met the challenge. And they established a very strong supplied and fortified military bases in South New Guinea, and began a ferocious defense of that island that caused the Japanese so much blood that they eventually withdrew.
So, it is to the eternal credit of the officers and men involved that they more than justified my confidence in them, and successfully overcame all difficulties. The results fully vindicated my full hopes and undoubtedly saved Australia. The Japanese themselves are taken completely by surprise. Captain Tokashashu Oma of the Japanese Navy, a senior staff officer of the Southeast Area Fleet at Rabaul, said, "In the spring of 1942, the Japanese did not think that General MacArthur would establish himself in New Guinea and defend Australia from that position. They also did not believe that he would be able to use New Guinea as a base for offensive operations against them. The Japanese felt that General MacArthur could not establish himself in Port Moresby because he did not have sufficient forces to maintain himself there, and because the Japanese Navy was confident that it could keep him out of New Guinea, in view of the successful air attacks against Darwin and Townsville. The Japanese reasoned that MacArthur's forces were weak, or they would have staved off the attacks. In addition to all our difficulties, MacArthur said, there was New Guinea itself, as tough and tenacious an enemy as the Japanese. Few areas in the world present so formidable an obstacle to military operation. The jagged mountains rear their tall peaks and aim sudden plunges gorges, towering above the trackless jungle that covers nearly the entire surface of the sprawling island. Swamps of nipa and mangrove pock the lowest areas, a stinking jumble of twisted, slime-covered roots and muddy soup. In the jungle itself, trails were a sea of mud, with little relief from the swollen rivers or razor-edged kunai grass that grows in treacherous bunches higher than a man's head. Offshore were dangerous reefs, most of them uncharted, and existing harbors were poor and inadequate. Everything about the island and its approaches seemed to hamper combat efforts. Nature did not stop with adverse terrain, however. Constant high humidity intensified the unrelenting heat that sapped human energy. The rain came as unpredictable but infrequent blinding deluge. Health conditions matched the world's worst. Malaria could be controlled only by means of an intensive constant regimen of tiresome preventive measures. Dengue fever was widespread, and quickly fatal blackwater fever was also a waiting menace. Both amoebic and bacterial dysentery were continuing threats. Tropic ulcers could develop from a scratch. For the man who relaxed his guard even for a moment, there waited hookworm, ringworm, scrub typhus, and the dread yaws. Disease was unrelenting enemy.
It's one of the most wild regions even to this day. And what he says about the humidity, I can personally testify to, because although I never made it to New Guinea, I did make it to Darwin, Australia. And the heat, even with a hat on your head, the heat walking in the sun for an hour destroyed me for 3 days. So you need an absolutely special condition. But the advantage MacArthur had is that New Guinea was considered like the territory of Australia. And it's been under Australian protection even to this day. A lot of Australians went to New Guinea to do things like hunting, outbacking. So they were familiar with the environment and they knew how to survive there. So that gave the Australian military a wealth of knowledge on how to conduct affairs there that the Japanese didn't have. Remember, Japan is not a tropical island. The island of Japan has the climate of like Maryland. Okay, you can get snow in many parts of it. So the absolutely savage humidity, heat, and environment is not something the Japanese were prepared to deal with.
So while they're getting set up and everything, the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor breaks the code of the Japanese, and it's set up for the Battle of Midway. So, between June 3rd and June 6th, naval battles fought in the Central Pacific, which considerably altered the general strategic situation. Our Navy had broken the Japanese code and was fully prepared to meet a powerful enemy concentration southwest of Midway Island. Our carrier aircraft, supported by land-based planes from Midway, sank one heavy cruiser, severely damaged a destroyer, and destroyed 250 aircraft. Our losses totaled one carrier, one destroyer, and 150 aircraft. Again, as in the Coral Sea battle, the opposing warships never once sighted each other, and not a single direct shot was exchanged. The dominant role of air power in naval warfare was clearly demonstrated. This decisive victory restored the balance in naval power in the Pacific. It removed the threat to Hawaii and the west coast of the United States. Thereafter, except for the Aleutians, where the Japanese had landed on Attu and Kiska Islands, enemy operations were confined to the South and Southwest Pacific areas.
Yes, most people don't know that Japan actually landed on U.S. territory in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska and held them for most of the duration of the war. The Alaskans know that, but down in the lower 48, we're never even taught that. So the Japanese did invade the United States in 1942, although I think Alaska was still a territory then, not a state. Okay. So what does MacArthur do in New Guinea to drive the Japanese out?
So, after the Battle of Midway, the Japanese concentrated on New Guinea area. The immediate objective became Milne Bay, the strategic importance of which they suddenly realized. It would serve them not only as a base for air support of an attack on Port Moresby, but would control the coastal trails along which ground troops could infiltrate, and by a flanking movement made in conjunction with a direct attack over the Owen Stanley Mountains, capture Port Moresby. Our own plans included an Allied base at Milne Bay, which would pave the way for a move around the end of New Guinea along the Papuan coast of Buna, thence to the main objective of Lion Salamua, avoiding the mountains entirely. With Milne Bay in Allied hands, the east flank of Port Moresby would be secured. Accordingly, I ordered the secret construction of an air base, air, land, and naval base at Gilly Gilly, located at the head of Milne Bay. The move along the coast to the site of the project base was made secretly and skillfully so that initial execution of the plan was unhampered by enemy opposition. Had the Japanese been aware of my intention to fortify Milne Bay, they would have undoubtedly made every effort to prevent its fulfillment. So they took Milne. So they had Milne Bay until around July 23rd, when the first ground action finally commenced. The Australians, determined fighters, as always, were forced to give way for greatly superior forces. A series of engagements followed, and by late August the enemy had passed over the peak of the trail and descending the slopes toward Moresby. In the meantime, the Japanese discovered the Allied occupation of Milne Bay, and aware of the strength we had built up there, launched a series of headlong assaults which ended in their complete destruction. They had fallen into the trap with disastrous results. By September 5th, the area was completely cleared. The Japanese secondary advance on the Kota Trail increased in presence and pressure, and the Australians finally took up a stand on the heights of Imita. This ridge was the final remaining train hurdle before Port Moresby. Here the line held, the Japanese having left the comparatively smooth slopes of the initial advance from Buna, had begun to experience increasing difficulties with the train and their extended tenuous lines of supply. Casualties from bombing, sickness, and shortage of food had exacted a heavy toll. A mere 20 air miles from his long-sought goal, the difficulties of the situation forced the Japanese commander to halt and consolidate his worn forces, while waiting reinforcements of men and supplies. His grim story of the Battle of Kokada Trail till a short time before his death is revealed by Major General Tomotaro Hori.
So that was they lured the Japanese to extended lines. So this is a very effective tactic in war. If your opponent has superior forces, get him to waste them building long supply lines by withdrawing or making him want to attack you at a great distance from his base of power. And this is how the Russians defeated both Napoleon and Adolf Hitler, Second World War. Port Moresby is on the northern east coast of Papua New Guinea, and that was the key strategic point to take. The Australians under MacArthur, take it later in the war. I don't think it was that year, though. What does MacArthur say about the completion of the campaign in New Guinea? Just east of Port Moresby is Guadalcanal, was the famous marine and naval action, one of the great battles of the Pacific is fought.
So, to finish off the Japanese, MacArthur learns of the Japanese positions, and so he decides to cut their supply lines in half, to literally just cut them off and starve them out, and not go headlong into battle with them. Go around them, cut them off, let them starve.
Those are their positions along the coast. So how does he conclude the campaign? They withdraw, the Japanese withdraw?
Yeah. So
I have to point out that New Guinea was very important for the Australians, but of very little importance to the Japanese, since it had no real economic value. It was more an obstacle. So the Australians had a lot more motive to take New Guinea than the Japanese, and this is an important factor in military morale, because your troops will not really want to fight so well to hold something they don't think is worth anything, whereas the contrary is true if they do.
So they finally just wear them out and they pull out, and most of them are killed.
Okay.
Okay.
So does he give us a date for when he marched into Port Moresby and took it? Or does he say anything about Guadalcanal?
It was in 1943. His last plans were put in place to seize and occupy and secure the rest of the
island.
Yep.
All this time, MacArthur's burning desire is to get back to the Philippines. Unfortunately, he was made to wait 30 months before he could return and fulfill his promise that he should return. So this slugging out campaign in New Guinea, though it was very successful and an amazing victory for Australian and Allied forces. I think there's some British units participated and along. I don't think there was many Americans that participated. Was for MacArthur just, side dish. He wanted to get to the Philippines, so it occupied his time, but he didn't think it was going to be so great because he wanted to get to the Philippines. So let's pause here and talk about Order Militaris Catholicis. And thank you for everyone listening to these programs. And AJ had this brilliant idea to talk about our Merc in the last program. And I want to thank the individual who bought one of our Lepanto flags. And we didn't get any pledges, so we didn't pledge to the order, but AJ, people can help us on social media in many ways. What are some of the ways anyone, no matter how old they are, can help us on social media get the message out?
So we are finding out that since about a year after our founding, which has been about 2017, we've been censored on Twitter like crazy. No one's hardly seeing our posts. No one's retweeting our stuff. Once in a while, Twitter will take the shadow ban off, and we'll get some new retweets. But we need people to join us at Ordo Militaris Catholicus and be our helpers on social media to share our information, share our merch on all the different social media platforms there are, and also to tweet out, share our programs that we do here, so that people know about us, so that we are, even though censored, we can try to get around the censors and be made more known to the people.
And so Twitter has a system where if you tweet out a link, you actually get knocked down on how many people see you. But we have to tweet out the links to our merchandise pages because otherwise no one will know how to get to them. So we need an auxiliary corps, and that's you guys and you gals out there, listen to us. Where on social media you reshare our posts that have the links to the merchandise sites or the pledging sites, the investment sites. So you don't get knocked down because you're not sharing a URL. You share our social media posts on your social media sites, and that helps us tremendously because we get like 500 visitors every time one of you shares one of our social media posts in a domain, in a group, in a forum, on a platform where we are not or we can't reach. We're totally shadow banned on Gab. No one of the 3,000 followers on Gab even sees our posts, if anyone is still left on Gab. Truth Social, we're not in Truth Social. And Parler shut down. Well, Parler wasn't really too active either. A new social media platform is ready to appear. I can't yet say anything about that. We will be strong in there. But on Twitter, you can do a lot by when you see our posts for the Levanto flag or for the badges like AJ showed yesterday, the morale badges, retweet that or overtweet it and say, hey, this is neat, this is great, I got one if you have one, help these people out. And that's a great way to get our stuff spread around because it's useless that we spend all day and only 100 people see our stuff, whereas in 2016 thousands would see every day each of our tweets. And this is the way we can get around censorship. It's obviously social media is created to make everyone listen to globalists and no one pay attention to Catholic, let alone groups like that. Here's AJ with one of the morale patches in hand, the Deus Vult and the Cross of Zura. The other thing you could do is you could get one of these patches, and then when you overtweet it, say, I have one, and share a picture of yourself holding it up. That'd be really cool, and that'd be a great way for everyone to know that, you're not just a nobody, you actually have the product and you approve of it. So that's a great way to help. We used to have a lot of social media assistants, but everyone's going to their own ways. So this is something that anyone can do, whether you're retired and have some time, whether you're a fan of our order, or whether you're a young person and you just want some good Catholic stuff to share, rather than the same old stuff, because Ordo Militaris Catholicus is where Deus Vult is incarnate. Okay, so AJ, MacArthur returns to Japan. This is one of the historic moments in the entire Pacific Campaign in the life of MacArthur, one of the important dates in Philippine history. They remember to this day, I think it's a national holiday, I think in the Philippines. They consider MacArthur such a great man. He always loved living with Catholics, and he really wanted to get back to Philippines, where he had lived many years with his family. So this is him returning, not his family, because he's part of a military invasion. Where did it happen? When did it happen? How did it happen? What's that great speech he gave upon landing?
So he gets on board the Nashville which is his flagship, on October 16th, and they take a 4-day trip, which goes to the Leyte Gulf. They arrive October 20th, 1944, and he writes, "We came to Leyte just before midnight of a dark and moonless night. The Stygian waters below and the black sky above seemed to conspire in wrapping us in an invisible cloak. As we lay to and waited for dawn before entering Leyte Gulf, phase one of the plan had been accomplished with little resistance. Now and then a ghostly ship would side quietly by us, looming out of the night and disappearing into the gloom almost before its outlines could be depicted. I knew that on every ship nervous men lined the rails or paced the decks, peering into the darkness and wondering what stood out there beyond the night, waiting for the dawn to come. There is a universal sameness in the motion of men, whether they be admiral or a sailor, a general or a private. Such a time as this. On almost every ship one could count on seeing groups huddled around maps in the wardrooms, infantrymen nervously inspecting their rifles, crews of the ships testing their gear, last-minute letters being written, men with special missions or objectives trying to visualize them again. For every man, there were tons of supplies and equipment, trucks, vehicles of all kinds, and more than 1 ton of ammunition for every man who would storm those shores. Later that evening, I went back to my cabin and read again the passage from the Bible, from which I have always gained inspiration and hope. And I prayed that a merciful God would preserve each one of those men on the morrow. The big guns on the ship opened fire at dawn. The noise, like a rolling thunder, was all around us. The Nashville, her engines bringing to life the steel under our feet, knifed in the Leyte Gulf. The ominous clouds of night still hung over the sea, fighting the sun for position of the sky. But the blackness had given way to somber gray. Even as we saw the black outline of the shores over the horizon, the cloak of the drabness began to roll back. On every side, ships were riding toward the island. The battle for Leyte had already begun.
And most generals, when the forces would arrive, would get in a little dinghy boat and have it brought ashore and step out on dry land. But no, that's not what MacArthur did. Despite he was an old man in retirement age, what did you do, AJ?
So he and the he and President Osmina went into the landing craft with the troops.
That's the president of the Philippines. Mhm.
And hit the
And
beaches with them.
so he walked right out into that waist deep water onto the shores. So really tough. He could have been shot any moment, but as I've mentioned many times, MacArthur and his whole family had a special providence where bullets just didn't hit them.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think that's a sign that he was doing God's will in his own way. Uh, so he arrives on Leyte Beach, and Gallywag waste time? No, he didn't.
He asked for a shortwave radio because that was what the Philippines had to listen to for any
Yes.
message.
And with this speech, he rallies the entire Philippine people. So, yeah, fortunately, I think he recorded in his book his speech. Can you read it, AJ?
Yeah. People of the Philippines, I have returned. By the grace of Almighty God, our forces stand again on Philippine soil consecrated in the blood of our two peoples. We have come, dedicated and committed to the task of destroying every vestige of enemy control over your daily lives, and of restoring upon a foundation of indestructible strength the liberties of your people. At my side is your president, Sergio Osmina, a worthy successor of the great patriot Manuel Quezon, with members of his cabinet. The seat of your government is now, therefore, firmly re-established on Philippine soil. The hour of your redemption is here. Your patriots have demonstrated an unswerving and resolute devotion to the principles of freedom that challenge the best that is written on the pages of human history. I now call upon your supreme effort that the enemy may know, from the temper of an aroused people within, that he has a force there to contend with, no less violent than is the force committed from without. Rally to me. Let the indomitable spirit of Baton and Corregidor lead on, as the lines of the battle roll forward to bring you within the zone of operations. Rise and strike. Strike at every favorable opportunity. For your homes, hearths, strike. For future generations of your sons and daughters, strike. In the name of your sacred dead, strike. Let no heart be faint. Let every arm be steeled. Let the guidance of divine God point the way. Follow in his name to the holy grail of righteous victory.
He mentioned the Holy Grail there, so you can see that this is, I'm ready to say before he said those words, because I've never heard this speech before, this is a real crusader kind of speech, you know? And this is the kind of speech Catholic leaders should give. And if you think you know a Catholic leader and he doesn't give speeches like this, then you know you're following the wrong guy. So this is a great speech. This is one of the great speeches of the 20th century. And let us not forget that in landing in the Philippines and making these promises, MacArthur had come to liberate a Catholic nation from a godless nation. So this was a war of righteousness, and I think this is where we can find an explanation in all the histories and events of his father and his life that brought him to this moment, because Jesus Christ and the Holy Virgin would not forget the Philippine people and would hear their prayers and send them a liberator. And MacArthur was that man.
So they pretty much, with the help of the underground in the Philippines and the guys who are still fighting the guerrilla warfare against the Japanese, they pretty much take the Leyte, all those areas, or not easy, but it wasn't not as hard as it was anywhere else. So he sets his sights on Manila itself. The Ninth Corps landed without losing a man, seized Olongapo, and by February 5th, vital passes to Bataan were in its hands. In the face of growing resistance, it moved in to secure the remainder of Bataan Peninsula and to assist in opening Manila Bay.
So this is 1945 now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me get my Roman numerals here. Let's see, this one. 9.
X is 10, V is 5.
So X1, 5. 14?
X 14, correct, yes.
The 14th Corps, after heavy fighting, cleared Clarkville and Fort Schotzenburg, joined contact with the 9th Corps at, oh dear lord, Denalupian, and prepared to continue its drive toward Manila. The 1st Cavalry Division under Major General Vernon D. Mudge landed in North Luzon and was attached to the 14th Corps. The 1st Corps continued to contain the main body of the enemy, cooped up in the Bontac Hills in the Cagayan Valley to the northeast. The 8th Army landed the 11th Airborne and the 24th Division at Batangas in the south. They moved forward to form the lower jaw of the Manila pincer movement. I was fighting on ground that had witnessed my father's military triumph nearly 50 years earlier in my own campaigns at the beginning of the war. I knew every wrinkle of the terrain, every foot of the topography. I was able to avoid many of the pitfalls, to circumvent many of the enemy traps. To have saved lives in this way is perhaps the most gratifying memory of the war. My staff did not like my frontline activity and tells this tale on me, whether in reproach or otherwise, I never knew.
Here's a general who led from the front, a truly courageous man, and unlike most modern generals who wouldn't have the courage to get outside of their command tent. And Philippines takes a while to fight. The Japanese hold out in the hills and the forests for quite a long time, but otherwise it was a rather rapid campaign and only lasted a few months. There were Japanese forces, I think, on the Philippines when Japan surrendered, so it wasn't complete, but this was like overwhelming to the Japanese. Japanese had a hard time supplying their people because Iwo Jima is about to take place, just 2 or 3 months left, and means the Japanese had to move all their shipping through the Taiwan Canal, Formosa Canal, and they were already being assaulted there and being bombed on Formosa too. So they were not in a good position. And then the people of the no one really on the Philippines supported the Japanese. There were some collaborators, but they had a hostile population too.
So, after they got pretty much everything freed up, now it's time to go see if any of his guys are still alive in the prison camps.
Where was the prison camp? When did he liberate the camp?
Okay, so
this is really an important personal moment in MacArthur's life because he left the men there and he felt deeply for them. And what he was about to find would shake him.
I was deeply concerned about the thousands of prisoners who had been interned at the various camps on Luzon since the early days of the war. Shortly after the Japanese had taken over the islands, they had gathered Americans, British, and other Allied nationals, including women and children, in concentration centers without regard to whether they were actual combatants or simply civilians. I have been receiving reports from my various underground sources long before the actual landing on Luzon, but the latest information was the most alarming. With every step that our soldiers took toward Santo Tomas University, Bilbid, Cabanatuan, and Los Banos, where those prisoners were held, the Japanese soldiers guarding them had become more and more sadistic. I knew that many of these half-starved, ill-treated people would die unless we rescued them promptly. The thought of their destruction with deliverance so near was deeply repellent to me. A unique operation was devised to rescue the prisoners at Cabanatuan, 35 miles within the enemy lines. In a masterful action executed by picked men from the 6th Army Rangers Battalion and the Filipino guerrillas, we surprised the Japanese completely. Their lines were penetrated and our forces walked into Cabanatuan, liberating every last man, woman, and child. Similar raids were later made at other prison centers with equally stunning results. In the morning hours of February 1st, the 1st Cavalry Division started down toward Manila. It exposed the left flank guarded by the Marine air units. Simultaneously, the 37th Division of the 14th Corps and the 11th Division of the 8th Army closed in on the city. A flying column from the cavalry unit Brigadier General William C. Chase entered Manila on February 4th and relieved the prisoners at Santo Tomas and Bilibid. For all strategic purposes, Manila was now in our hands. A desperate element of the enemy, trapped by our encirclement, fought for 2 weeks to the death and caused numerous unnecessary casualties and much destruction of property.
It's interesting to note that Philippines was liberated on the vigil of the presentation of our Lord, or candle mass, Lara, Philippines are very devoted, like most of the Spanish-speaking world, to Our Lady of the Presentation, or Candelaria, they call her, or Candelaria.
I entered the city with the 37th Division. I was anxious to rescue as much as I could of my home atop the Manila Hotel and accompany a leading patrol of the division. It had been reported to me that the penthouse was intact, having been preserved probably because of two vases at the entrance which had been presented to my father by the former Emperor of Japan. We reached the new Lunta, but were temporarily pinned down on Burnham Green by machine gun fire from the hotel itself. Suddenly the penthouse blazed into flame. They had fired it. I watched, with indescribable feelings, the destruction of my fine military library, my souvenirs, my personal belongings of a lifetime. It was not a pleasant moment.
That shows you how petty the Japanese forces were. No sense of military valor to do that while you're losing.
So it was like, okay, they did that. Destroy the hotel.
Yeah, the hotel knocked out.
So he made his way to the concentration camps. I cannot recall, even in a life filled with emotional scenes, a more moving spectacle than my first visit to the Santo Tomas camp. It was still under bombardment when I arrived. The pitiful half-starved inmates broke out in excited yells. I entered the building and was immediately pressed back against the wall by thousands of emotionally charged people. In their ragged, filthy clothes, the tears streaming down their faces, they seemed to be using their last strength to fight their way close enough to grasp my hand. One man threw his arms around me and put his head on my chest. He cried unashamedly. A once beautiful woman in tatters laboriously lifted her son over the heads of the crowd and asked me to touch him. I took the boy in momentarily and was shocked by the uncomprehending look of depravation in his eyes. They wept and laughed hysterically, and all of them at once tried to tell me thank you. I was grabbed by the jacket, and I was kissed. I was hugged. It was a wonderful, never to be forgotten moment. You be a lifesaver, and not a life taker.
Those were, I think, civilian prisoners. Did he find his men from Bataan? And what prison camp were they being held in?
So he then went down the road to Bilibid, where the military prisoners were. I will never know how the 800 prisoners there survived for 3 long years. The food given them was generally full of worms and skimpy even by Oriental standards. The men who greeted me were scarcely more than skeletons. The military prisoners of war had been kept separate from the civilians. The soldiers had maintained their sense of discipline all through the long years. Somehow every man had dragged himself to his feet to stand beside his cot in some semblance of attention. They remained silent as though at inspection. I looked down the lines of men bearded and soiled with hair that often reached below their shoulders, with ripped and soiled shirts and trousers, with still toes sticking out of such shoes as remained, with suffering and torture written on their gaunt faces. Here was all that was left of my men of Bataan and Corregidor. The only sound was the occasional sniffle of a grown man who could not fight back the tears. As I passed slowly down the scrawny, suffering column, a murmur accompanied me as each man, barely speaking above a whisper, said, "You're back," or "You made it," or "God bless you." I could only reply, "I'm a little late, but we finally came." I passed on out of the barracks compound and looked around at the debris that was no longer important to those inside. The tin cans they had eaten from, the dirty old bottles they had drunk from. It made me ill just to look at them. Manila was in a frenzy. Men, women, children literally danced in the streets. Muhabbet was the joyous word. I heard it everywhere. I had intended to drive around the city just to survey the damage, but I found myself the center of a triumphal procession. For me, it was the end of a 4,000-mile road. It had been a long, hard journey, but in some ways, that last 5 miles was the hardest.
Great. That would be a great scene from a film, and it's a great moment in history. And for us Catholics, it's something that we should talk about because this is liberation of a Catholic country. And the more I learn about the history of the world, the more I feel kind of shortchanged that our Catholic clergy don't tell us about these things that would really inspire us and help us orientate ourselves in Catholic life. And before we, I want to pause one more time in the show before we continue MacArthur's recount to the end of the Second World War in the Pacific, and that is, everyone is aware around the world nowadays that militaries have become woke, they've become Marxist centers of indoctrination, and a lot of Catholic men still have the vocation to serve in the military. Where are they going to go? Would you advise your son, your nephew, your grandson to join the armed forces of your own nation? Chances are he would be brainwashed, or if not persecuted as a Catholic, or come out totally morally depraved. He could even be raped by fellow soldiers, since now most militaries have abandoned all morality. Ordo Militaris Catholicus is security effort based on Catholic military ethics. And we have several dreams that we'd like to put in practice to help Catholic men who have this vocation fulfill it in a career of private security. One is investment. If you invest with our Montana Corporation, we could build a training camp and give these guys military grade training so that they could be deployed defending Catholics who are persecuted around the world, or other Christians, Catholic clergy. Just today, there's the news of Father Javier down in central Mexico who was gunned down while he was headed to another parish. I don't know if they gunned him down because he was a preacher of peace or they would try to rob the collection. But in many parts of the world, we're losing clergy and religious and lay people because we have no one defending them. And in the Catholic Church, we have no military force to defend ourselves. It's ridiculous. This is the first time in history that this is the case. Before the French Revolution, it was certainly not the case. There were armed even the bishops had armies before the French Revolution. So where are these men going to go? Where are the Catholic military high schools in existence? And AJ, this is an idea you have. Why is it needed, and why would it be so wonderful to have a Catholic military high school in the United States or in any country that's Catholic?
So, military high schools or secular high schools, even some religious Catholic or Protestant high schools, are also becoming woke. And sure don't want to send your kids off to your military high school academies, or because they're also woke in dens of vipers and everything else. So we also want to open up a true Catholic military high school where they would get proper education, but also proper military training. It would be a mixture of the Virginia Military Institute and West Point, the training they would get there. And we would try to get the same type of gray uniforms that they would wear on dress uniforms when they parade or go to church.
And most importantly, give them a sound Catholic moral
Mm-hmm.
and religious education, so they understand that Christianity is not about pacifism. It's about the defense of the innocent. And this is a noble and honorable vocation that is quite different from almost anything others, and something that should be praised and honored and respected. Not mentioned that a Catholic military high school is an excellent way to give boys discipline and prepare them for a life serving God in whatever walk of life they may have, and preparing future leaders of the Catholic world. And both these projects we could only accomplish if we got investors. And our Montana Corporation is a stock corporation, so we can sell stock. And we're currently trying we're currently offering $5 million to start a project like this in the United States, $5 million worth of stock, and another $5 million worth of stock to start a project like this outside of the United States. And so if anyone listening to us is a Catholic investor or knows Catholic investors, this would be a unique way of investing and bringing into being something that would have a great impact on the future of the church and on Catholic youth. So now, with the capture of the Philippines, what does MacArthur do?
Well, he was preparing, the invasion of Japan. But the Masons in charge had other ideas to bring the war to a close even quicker. The A-bomb.
What was his reaction to their proposal of launching nuclear weapons against Japan? Was he even told?
In view, so here we go.
Against civilian populations.
Yeah. In view of the projected assault on Japan, it was decided at the Potsdam Conference to dissolve the Southwest Pacific area on August 15th. The Southeast Command of Admiral Mountbatten was expanded to include Borneo and Celebes. The Australian and Dutch units would garrison the Netherlands East Indies. As the date for the transfer of responsibilities approached, I dispatched messages to the government of Australia, New Zealand, and the Netherlands in tribute to the Allied troops who had fought under me in the odd-risk campaigns in the South Pacific. On July 26 came the Potsdam ultimatum giving Japan a single choice of surrender or destruction. The Japanese government failed to accept promptly the terms of the Potsdam Proclamation, and as a direct consequence, Japan became a victim of the most destructive and revolutionary weapon in the long history of warfare, the atom bomb. The first bomb of this type ever used against an enemy was released early on August 6th from the American superfortress over the military base city of Hiroshima and exploded with incomparable and devastating force. The city was almost completely and uniformly leveled. Development of the nuclear weapons had not been revealed to me until just prior to the attack on Hiroshima.
What does he say anything about what he felt in regard to the morality of annihilating a civilian population? Because heretofore this would be a war crime.
Yeah. And doesn't say it here, but in the movie with Gregory Peck, I'm guessing he also used other writings of his on it. But he was like, the word that Truman said, I wasn't told about this weapon by FDR. They just said, sign here and we'll do what we're doing to do. He's like, how was he not told? He was the vice president of the United States at the time. Now the president. He's like, and when, so he was totally against it. and he wanted to do it the old-fashioned way of going city by city in Japan, doing what he's done all through the Pacific.
Mhm.
So after the first one dropped on August 8th, with the world still reeling from this shattering experience, the Soviet Union formally declared war on Japan, following 4 years of pretentious neutrality that had allowed Japanese forces to move against and occupy New Guinea and the Philippines. Instead of being tied down to guarding the Siberian frontier, the Russians attacked the Japanese Kuomintang army in Manchuria. I sent a military mission to my headquarters in Manila. It was headed by General Kuzma Derienko, an officer of considerable ability who later became the Soviet diplomatic representative in Tokyo. So then on August 9th, a second atomic bomb destroyed the city of Nagasaki. It made a cloud of dust and debris that rose 50,000 feet and was visible for more than 175 miles. The two bombs that fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were dropped was a 509th composite bomb group based in Tinian and belonging to General Arnold's Strategic Command. The selection of Nagasaki as the second objective of the atomic bomb was caused by unfavorable weather conditions. After circling for 15 minutes above the smoke-obscured city of Kotura, which was the primary target, the bombing plane flew on to drop the bomb over Nagasaki, the alternate target. Kokura was spared by a blind miracle of chance, but Nagasaki, 100,000 inhabitants, died within seconds. On August 10th, Japan had enough, and so began the end of Japan.
Japan surrenders. So in our next program, we're going to cover one of the most remarkable moments in Japanese history, where MacArthur becomes the de facto ruler of Japan in the military occupation. And he does some things that surprise the whole world and surprised the Japanese, which put a stamp on the Japanese nation and constitution to this day, and shows that he was not only a great military leader, but a great statesman and a profound expert in Oriental affairs and in jurisprudence. Makes him one of the great men of world history. So thank you, AJ, for having me on this fabulous reading of the life of MacArthur in the Second World War. And we'll go on to talk about what he does after the war and after Japan, too.
Yep.
And we'll add an episode of our own at the end. What's that going to be about, AJ?
It'd be about his mysterious death.
And how that's tied into Jack Ryan. We did a program about the life and death of Jack Ryan, the murder mystery.
Yep.
So thank you, AJ, for having me on Order Militaris Radio TV.
This is Order Militaris Radio TV signing off. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.